Hey there everybody, it's Mike DiLisio, and today I'm going to be reviewing the Stygian Society from designer Kevin Wilson and publisher Ape Games. In the Stygian Society, you are playing a party of adventurers, cooperatively battling your way up a wizard's tower. You're trying to climb this tower and eventually defeat the evil wizard at the top who has been corrupting the land. Well, that's the theme. The actual game is a cooperative cube tower vertical dungeon crawl type of a thing? Hard to explain. Let me just show you how it plays, then we'll come back here and I'll give you my final thoughts. In the Stygian Society, you are playing a party of adventurers here. Looks like we've got the knight, the burglar, the doctor, and the spell sling. They are represented by this little miniature here, starting out on the ground floor. And they are traveling up this tower, trying to get to the top so they can defeat the evil wizard that's there on floor 6. All right, so it's kind of a vertical dungeon crawl to some extent. It is a cooperative game, all right? And what you're going to be doing is going through a series of floors, all right? So let's just say, for example, we're starting off the game here. We're on our first floor. We take one of these lower room cards and we turn it over. All right, now just for the purposes of space, I'm going to be placing things in a way I wouldn't normally do so, all right? So in this case, this first floor is going to be the commander of the troops, and it gives us a number of pieces of information. But the main thing that we're going to be looking at are what are the types of monsters that we're going to be facing. Here it looks like we're facing titans, wizard's eyes, and poltergeists. All right, so for the sake, again, of what I'm doing, I'm just going to place this right here. All right, and it's showing you 2 ranks. You've got the front rank and the rear rank. So I'm going to go ahead and take these little figures that represent these different monsters of the various colors here. And then we're going to find the applicable cards. All right, now I've already set this up so that I've got my Titan here, which is the red monster on this particular room. And then we've got the, well, I'm going to put this right here for now. Then we've got the poltergeist here. Okay. And then we've got the wizard's eye here. All right. And so each of these monsters are going to tell you what their particular abilities are, things you might need to know. For example, for this wizard's eye, it says damage inflicted to them is reduced by 1 for every monster in the row in front of it. Well, it's in that rear row right now, so it actually has 3 in front of them. And so it, instead of taking 1 damage to defeat it, it's going to take 4 in this case until you can start defeating some of those enemies in the frontmost rows. All right, so for the sake of room, I'm just going to put these to the side for now. All right, so what you're going to be doing once you've kind of figured out what your room looks like is you are going to be taking actions as heroes, and you do this by dropping cubes into this cube tower, because this wizard's tower also functions as a cube tower. All right, so as a hero, you've got a couple of different options. You've got these generic actions that are right here: attack, help, and regroup. You can always use those. They are level 0 actions. Or you can use some special actions that you may have yourself, all right? So you have a pre-printed action on your board here. So for the knight, for example, has Steel Fist at their ability, a melee attack that you can use. Or you also at the beginning of the game get a random level 1 ability as well. Okay, sometimes these are going to be actions, but usually they're going to be some type of ability that will allow you to augment what you're going to do. So let's say, for example, we're going to start with the knight. What we're going to do is we say, all right, the knight's going to try to do their Steel Fist attack, which is a melee attack. You choose a target in the front rank and you drop these cubes, 2 blue cubes, and gray stands for whatever cube you would like. And then it tells you how it works. It says basically if you spend 2 blue cubes, deal 3 wounds to your target, plus 2 extra wounds for every additional 2 blue you spend from the field. All right, and that's generally how these are going to work, all right? So let's say, for example, I think, okay, I'm going to go ahead and just go all in on blue and hope that I can get a lot of these blue cubes to actually fall through the cube tower. Because if you've ever played a game with a cube tower before, the way they work is that you'll drop cubes in the top. Some of them, they might all come out, but they also might not all come out. Some of them might get caught in there that on subsequent drops might knock them out. The other thing you always have to do is you have to look at what the peril cubes say, and almost always it's going to be one of each of the bad guy cubes, the red, yellow, and black that correspond to those baddies there, okay? So I would be doing something like this, dropping 1 red, 1 yellow, 1 black, and 3 blues, okay? I go ahead and I drop them into the cube tower. You don't throw them, you don't, you just go about 1 inch above and you drop them, okay? In this case, out of all of those cubes I dropped, the only 2 that came out were a blue and a yellow, all right? And you can see I dropped quite a bit more. So the rest of them are stuck in that tower. So the first thing that you do after you've dropped those cubes is you look to see what the enemy activations are. You have to do the bad stuff first, all right? And in the case of this, you look at red, then yellow, then black, all right? Well, to trigger the red, you need 4 red cubes. We don't have that. To trigger the yellow, you need 3 or 4 yellow cubes, and to trigger the black, you need 2. No, there are no black cubes there. If there are not any monsters of that particular color, then you look to this room card, and it'll say add 2 to your peril if you have 4 red cubes, 4 yellow, or 3 black. That, again, it only applies if there's not a monster of that color, okay? Peril is something that's going to happen throughout the game. I'm actually going to move these off so I can show you this better. Peril is tracked right down here, and as peril goes up, you're going to refer to your room card and bad stuff is going to happen. So in this case, once you get to 4 peril, if the poltergeist, which was the yellow monster, still remains, add a red, yellow, and black to the field at the end of this turn, which means adding more bad cubes here that could then be spent, all right? You may have noticed this little area here. This is called the crypt. Whenever a cube lands in the crypt, that counts as 2, whether it's bad or good. And so you can spend those as 2. The other thing that cubes in the crypt do is that if any time when you drop cubes into the tower, 2 or more cubes of any color land in the crypt, you increase the luck, all right? And luck is basically a wild cube. You can spend luck at any time to count as any one cube, all right? So, generally speaking, that's the flow of the game. You are going to choose what type of action you're going to do, determine what the cubes you're going to be dropping are, dropping in those peril cubes as well, then activating the enemy's turn based upon what cards are in play or what the room might be, then doing your action, hoping that you don't get wounded too much, gaining luck perhaps, also definitely increasing peril, and when you do defeat enemies, you're going to be looking at the number in the upper right to determine how much experience you get. So if you were able to defeat this poltergeist, it's going to give you 3 experience. You'll see this marker is set on 8. That's the starting experience kind of trigger. Once you reach or exceed that, then what every character can do is one of 2 things. They can either go through all of their cards of the same level. So we all started with a level 1 card, so you can go and pick any one of these other level 1 cards and add them to your kind of tableau, or you can randomly choose one from a higher level, from level 2 in this case. So there's a bit of a push your luck. If you want to know exactly what you're picking, you pick one from the same level. If you want one from a higher level, that's great, but you may not love what you get. There's kind of, again, a little bit of a push your luck that happens. Also, there are negative statuses that can happen to your adventurers throughout the game through the effects of creatures usually, and sometimes through the effects of chests that we'll talk about in a moment. You can become weakened or stricken or incapacitated or cursed, and when you get these, you're going to be adding these status tokens onto the card that are going to represent these different colored cubes that you have to remove from the field for everyone that's on this card. So these are bad. You don't want them. There are ways to remove them by spending cubes of that color, and sometimes you have adventurers that have healing abilities that can remove status tokens things along those lines, okay? If you are able to finish off this room to successfully defeat all of the creatures before either you meet your cap of wounds or your peril goes up to 20, which in this case, it's always going to have some type of bad thing that ends the game. You're fatally flanked, the heroes lose the game. You don't ever want your peril to go up to 20. If you're able to do that, then you can choose whether you want to open a chest or not. And here it's going to tell you how many chests are in the room. In this case, just one. All right? When you do that, let's say, for example, we ended this floor with 7 peril. All right? What you do is you turn over this card and you look, and these are all just randomized. You look at the number here. And if your number is equal to or lower, you ignore what's on the card. If not, you have to do what it says. In this case, the number is 5. We're at a 7. This would trigger. Each hero is cursed, and this chest contains 1 fewer treasure than usual. So everyone would have to take this cursed status for the next room, which would not be great. And instead of drawing 2 treasure cards, which you normally do, you would only draw 1. But anyway, these are all good. Some of them are for 1 person in the party. Sorry, that little symbol there. This actually just stands for basically blocking a damage. And some of these are for the party. Okay? So they're all good. Some of them might be better than others situationally, but generally speaking, they're all good. As you progress up the tower, you are eventually going to hopefully reach room 3. When you reach room 3, you're fighting a mid-boss. And we have a number of different mid-bosses here. Okay? They're difficult, as you might expect. They make it a little bit more challenging. If you make it through there, you go to 4, then 5, and then 6 is always going to be the wizard. And you need to defeat the wizard, whichever one it may be, and there are a number of different ones, to win the game. So here we've got our different wizards. You can see their hit points are quite high. They've got a lot of nasty effects that make them very, very challenging. And you win the game if you make it all the way through the tower up to the top here. There we go. He's standing up there on 6, facing off against that wizard. If you defeat that wizard in your final battle, then you have won the game. Otherwise, you're going to lose through a number of different ways, either through reaching the maximum number of wounds or exceeding it, or if your peril ever goes above 220 on a particular room, then that also would be a losing condition. Just really quickly, when you do finish off a room, you do put the peril back to 0. So you don't have to make it through less than 20 for the whole game. Just each room, you have to make it less than 20. All right, well, that generally speaking is how the game works. Obviously, there's a little bit more nuance, but that's a pretty basic overview of the Stygian Society. Let's head back up, and I'll give you my final thoughts. Okay, hopefully that gives you a pretty good idea on how the Stygian Society plays. There were a few things I left out, things along the lines of when you go to rooms 4 and 5 past that mid-boss, you're going to be drawing upper floor rooms, which are different, slightly harder, and you're going to have different treasure cards, things along those lines. But overall, I think you got a pretty good idea on how the game plays. The first thing I want to do is talk about some benchmarks, some just big picture items I wanted to discuss. The first is setup and teardown. Is the setup and teardown arduous, difficult? Well, no, it's not arduous or difficult, but it is a bit lengthy. However, that being said, with the amount of components and the cube tower and the cubes you have to arrange and getting the monster cards all set up, takes a bit of time. The game itself is a very lengthy game. That's actually something I'm going to talk about more here in a little bit. And so the fact that the setup takes a bit of time and the teardown takes a little bit of time doesn't bother me as much in a game like this where you're probably talking 2 to potentially 3 hours to play the game. And so if it was a shorter game, it would maybe be something that I would mention as a negative, but here it's fine for the amount of time the game actually takes. The other thing I want to talk about is rules, and there are some significant issues I wanted to discuss with the rule book. One of the main features of the game is this idea of luck. You've got a special, you've got a tracker for it on the board, along with your health and with the peril, you've got a luck tracker. However, nowhere in the rule book does it describe how you gain luck. It tells you what luck is for. You can spend a luck for any color cube you like. But nowhere in the rule book does it talk to you about how to gain luck. Well, Since then, the publisher has addressed this and released some, actually multiple erratas and FAQs that they have released on Board Game Geek, at least, maybe on their publisher website as well. I haven't checked that. But that's disappointing. That is very disappointing. You can't necessarily assume that people are going to take the time to look that up. They may just get frustrated and say, you know what, I don't even know if I want to play this game. I don't even know how this works. It's again, disappointing. It's something that should have been caught and was not. There is also a bit of some ambiguities, I would say, in the rule book. One example of that would be where they're talking about if you clear a room, how to determine how many chests that you can open to look for treasure. Well, it says basically, they'll tell you on the room card. Well, they don't really go into any more detail. There are these gems that are located in the upper right of the room cards. That's going to tell you how many chest cards to open. Why isn't it a chest symbol? I don't know. At least that would have been a bit more intuitive. If they're not going to tell you in the rule book specifically, count the number of gem tokens, that's the number of chests you open. It would have been nice for it at least to have been a chest symbol, because you might have been going, oh, all right, well, there's 2 chest symbols here. I guess that means I open up 2 or check 2 of these chest cards. That's a bit of another disappointment. So there were some issues with the rule book. The flow of the game, everything else was well explained, but the luck is a huge miss, and the chests also were a bit of a miss. Art and components. Overall, I feel like there is some nice art in the game. I feel like it is kind of bright and vibrant and cartoony, which for this game I think fits well. It's not a game that I feel like is meant to be taken too terribly seriously, okay? And the art reflects that, especially the character art. Also, one of the things I do like is that they have alternate character art for each of the characters. That's always nice, gives you some more kind of options on who you'd like to play as. Some issues that I had, the status tokens are these really little circular tokens. And I guess it makes sense that they're not too large, because you place them, and sometimes numbers of them, onto a status card, so you don't want them too large. But they're a bit too small. They're a bit fiddly, because you're supposed to place them all face down. There's a huge stack of them. That takes a little while to get them all face down, just so you can randomly pick a color. Speaking of colors, they're supposed to represent kind of the 3 hero cube colors of blue, white, and green. However, there are no white status tokens. There are blue and green and what look to be either black or gray that are supposed to be white. So that was an odd production issue. I don't know why, but I thought I would mention that up. The card quality is okay. It's not great. It seems to be functional. I've played the game a number of times, and I don't sleeve these cards, and I haven't had any issue, but it's not the most spectacular card quality I've found. The minis, the little plastic minis that represent the enemies and your party, they're nice. I don't know that they're necessary, but they're not completely superfluous. They're not over the top, but they're nice. And probably the centerpiece component would be that cube tower. It works very well. Now, is it the most sturdy thing in the world? Probably not, but I haven't had a whole lot of issues with it. I haven't had to glue it. The way it's constructed is such that you should be able to keep that cube tower in working condition just fine. The most important aspect of it is that it does feel like it does a good job of randomizing those cubes, keeping some cubes in the tower, letting others fall through. When you put in subsequent turns some cubes coming out that weren't part of that drop. I have found in other games that utilize cube towers, they have not worked as well. This is probably the best cube tower that I've played with overall, as far as the distribution of the cubes. So that's a positive. All right, so for my overall game impressions, first I'll talk about some things that I thought were a bit negative, then something that is kind of neutral, and then the positives. On the negative side, I feel like the game is too long. I believe it says 150 minutes on the game box, and bravo for truth in advertising, because oftentimes publishers will underrepresent how long a game takes. But if you're going to be, especially if you're going to be successful, if you do very poorly, as I often do, the game may not be as long because you might die early. But to complete this game, you are talking over 2 hours and probably closer to 3, if not longer. It is a very lengthy game. Does the game support that length? I don't know. It can feel very epic if you're able to pull the game off, but you've taken a long time. I do feel like it would have been nice if the game was a bit shorter. So that is something that is a bit of a negative to me. Also, as I mentioned, those rules and those production issues, they can detract from the game experience as a whole, especially as you're first learning it. When you know the game well and don't have to refer to the rules, then maybe this is not as much of an issue. But your first couple of games are probably going to cause you some problems because of the rules and the component issues that I talked about. A neutral topic is the difficulty of the game. I personally find the game very, very difficult. Very difficult. Now, that's not necessarily bad. A lot of people want their co-op games to be very, very tough. I have found this to be one of those. So it's not necessarily bad, but it is something that I wanted to mention because this is not a walk in the park. You're not going to breeze your way through this cooperative adventure game. Now, positives. I feel like this has a very unique feel for a cooperative game. And that's partially due to the cube tower, of course. It does follow a similar feel of other cooperative games in the sense that you have a series of bad things that happen, and then you do things to try to counteract and mitigate those. But it doesn't feel, and you're talking about things like Pandemic, you know, where bad things happen and then you have to mitigate them. This has a bit of that, but it's really more about making use of your clever use of your cards, your abilities, sometimes doing something that might seem suboptimal to set yourself up for a later turn. I feel like the Stygian Society does that more than most other cooperative games I've played. What might seem to be the most obvious choice is not always the best choice, and I like that too. Sometimes you outside of the box thinking, I have found, can really pay off in this game, and I like that. Not a lot of cooperative games, I feel like, reward you for thinking outside the box, taking risks, and I think that this is one of those games that does that, and I appreciate that. Also, if you can make it past the first couple of rooms especially, because when you start out, you're very weak, right? You've got your base generic actions, whatever your kind of generic action is on your player board, and one card that you've been randomly given at the beginning of the game. You're pretty weak. It's tough. Those enemies seem really tough. But if you can make it past a few rooms and start getting leveled up and start getting more cards, you can really pull off some clever combos and some nice kind of turns, big epic turns where you feel like, you know, your back's up against the wall. There's no way I'm going to be able to clear this room. And you're able to pull off 2 or 3 good turns in a row. And all of a sudden, you've made some big dent in it and you're able to clear that room. That is a very satisfying feeling. And this game gives you that. But oftentimes, you have to make it past those first couple of rooms so you can build your characters up to be able to do that. So overall, I feel like the Stygian Society does enough well that I'm going to recommend it. I'm going to be giving it a 7 out of 10. However, the game would be ranked higher. I would be rating this game higher because I do enjoy playing it. It feels unique. This is a game that I think stands out in its gameplay from other cooperative games. But what really prevents it from going higher are those significant issues with the rules and with the production value, and the length also means that it's not a game I'm going to necessarily get out as often as a cooperative game that might take an hour or so. All right, well, that's it for me. This is Mike DiLisio signing off from Dice Tower headquarters.